The crystal chandeliers of the Nightfang estate blazed with 1,000 candles, hot enough to make diamonds of sweat gleam on powdered throats. But the mountain wind beyond the ballroom's frosted windows screamed at 30 degrees below freezing, cold enough to stop a wolf's heart in 4 minutes. While the high wolves twirled in silk and velvet to the string quartet's crescendo, a young maid named Elara Snowveil pressed her bare palms against the outer courtyard doors, her breath no longer forming clouds because her lungs were too frozen to exhale. She had been locked outside as entertainment, wearing nothing but her servant's wool dress and a shawl thin as a promise. No one cared. No one even glanced toward the terrace until Alpha Kael Nightfang felt something in his chest shatter like ice cracking over deep water. A bond that shouldn't exist, pulling him toward the snowdrift where a girl's golden hair was disappearing beneath white powder. What happened next wasn't mercy. It was the beginning of a purge that would drown the old nobility in their own corruption. Before Elara's fate unfolds, I invite you to join this journey, subscribe and share where you're reading from. Your voice in this story matters. Now, let's continue. The ballroom of the Nightfang Manor shimmered like the inside of a jewel box. Gilded frames held portraits of deceased alphas, their painted eyes watching the winter gala with permanent disapproval, and the vaulted ceiling was strung with garlands of winter roses and silver bells that chimed softly whenever a dancer spun too fast. It was the longest night, the pack's most sacred celebration, when wolves honored their survival through the brutal seasons and reaffirmed the hierarchies that kept them alive, or kept some of them alive. Elara adjusted the starched white collar of her maid's uniform, her fingers numb, not from cold yet, but from the low, constant hum of terror that had become her pulse. She had been working in the Nightfang household for 3 years, ever since her father's mysterious death had left her with nothing but debts and a bloodline no one would speak of. She had learned the rules quickly: move like smoke, speak only when spoken to, become furniture. But when you served under the watch of Luna Mirelda Ashcroft and her favorite nephew Tarek Ashmore, invisibility was a fantasy you paid for in bruises. Tarek Ashmore was a wolf carved from entitlement and old silver. He was handsome the way a winter storm is handsome, clean lines, cold beauty, and a violence that announced itself only when it was too late to run. His black hair was swept back with pomade, and he wore a tailored suit of charcoal wool with a pocket square that matched the pale gray of his wolf's eyes. Everyone in the pack assumed he would be named Beta before spring. Everyone except Alpha Kael, who had never confirmed the appointment. But Tarek had decided Elara was an insult to his bloodline, not because she had challenged him, she would never dare, but because 2 weeks ago, Alpha Kael had stopped mid-conversation with the visiting alphas to hand him his empty glass personally, and he had said, "Careful with that one, it belonged to my mother." 4 words, that was all, but it had been enough to turn Tarek's contempt into something sharper. "You, girl." Elara went still, the silver tray in her hands trembling just enough to make the champagne flutes sing against each other. She turned slowly to see Tarek standing near the terrace doors, the ones that led to the outer courtyard where the ice sculptures were displayed. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his expression bored, but his eyes held the gleam of a wolf that had cornered something small. "Yes, Lord Ashmore," Elara whispered, dropping her gaze to the parquet floor immediately. Tarek's smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. He gestured lazily toward the terrace doors with a crystal tumbler half filled with amber liquor. "The ice sculptures are melting. Luna Mirelda finds it unsightly. Go refill the basins beneath them." Elara's stomach dropped. The terrace, the unheated open-air courtyard where the temperature was currently lethal. She opened her mouth to suggest sending one of the male servants. They at least have proper coats. But Tarek's expression shifted just enough to show teeth. "Did I stutter, girl?" "No, Lord Ashmore." She set down the tray on a nearby console table, her hands shaking now for an entirely different reason. The other servants had gone quiet, their eyes carefully fixed on their own tasks. No one would speak for her. No one ever did. She moved toward the service corridor that led to the linen closets where the outdoor supplies were kept, but Tariq's voice followed her like a cold draft. "Oh, and Elara?" The use of her actual name made her freeze. He'd never used her name. "Do hurry back. We wouldn't want you to miss the Alpha's toast. I'm sure he's simply desperate to acknowledge your contributions to the household." Laughter rippled through the nearby nobles, polite and vicious. One of them, Lady Frost, a woman whose family had held land for 6 generations, leaned toward her companion and whispered loudly enough for Elara to hear, "I'm amazed they let Gutterblood handle the crystal. My mother would have had her scrubbing kennels." Elara kept walking. She had learned long ago that responding only made it worse. She retrieved a heavy cloak from the servant's closet, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders, and filled a copper pitcher with steaming water from the kitchen hearths. The cook, an older woman named Bess, gave her a long, worried look, but said nothing. Even kindness had limits in the Nightfang manor. The cold hit her the moment she pushed through the terrace doors. It wasn't the crisp, invigorating cold of a winter morning. It was the kind of cold that had weight, that pressed against your chest and stole your breath before you could even scream. The courtyard was beautiful in the way a graveyard is beautiful, silent, white, and utterly indifferent to suffering. Ice sculptures of wolves in mid-leap stood on marble pedestals, their forms glowing blue under the moonlight. Silver basins beneath them were meant to catch the meltwater, but the water had long since frozen solid. Elara poured the hot water carefully, watching it steam and hiss against the ice. Her fingers were already aching, even through her gloves. She worked quickly, moving from sculpture to sculpture, her breath coming in short, visible gasps. She could hear the muffled music from inside, the laughter, the clink of glasses. The world of warmth and light was only 20 feet away, separated by thick glass and thicker indifference. She was refilling the last basin when she heard the sound that stopped her heart, the heavy thunk of a bolt sliding home. She spun toward the terrace doors to see Tariq's silhouette on the other side of the glass, his hand still on the iron bar. He smiled at her. Then he turned and disappeared back into the golden glow of the ballroom. She ran to the doors, slamming her palms against the glass. "Wait, please!" Her voice was swallowed by the wind. She could see them all inside, dancing, drinking, laughing. She pounded harder, but the music was too loud, the festivities too consuming. No one looked her way. She was invisible again, but this time it was a death sentence. She tried to shift. Every wolf could shift, even Omega's, even her. But the moment she reached for her wolf, she felt nothing, just a terrible, hollow emptiness where her beast should have been. Her knees buckled. The chamomile tea Luna Merelda had insisted she drink before the gala to calm her nerves. Wolfsbane. They had poisoned her. The cold was inside her now, turning her blood to slush, her thoughts to static. She sank down against the door, her legs no longer able to hold her weight. The cloak was useless. The wind tore through it like it was made of cobwebs. She thought about her father, about the way he used to tell her that the Snowvale line was born in winter, that cold was their element, their birthright. But that was a story for children. The truth was simpler. Cold didn't care about your bloodline. It just took and took until there was nothing left. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time became meaningless. The snow began to fall, soft and relentless, covering her shoulders, her hair, her lap. She stopped shivering. That was bad, she thought, distantly. When you stopped shivering, it meant your body was giving up. She could still see the ballroom through the glass, blurred now by frost and snow. They were toasting something, probably the Alpha. Everyone always toasted the Alpha. Somewhere far away, deep in the molten core of the manor, Alpha Kael Nightfang dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor in a spray of crystal and golden wine, but he didn't notice. He was too busy clawing at his chest, where something ancient and absolute had just snapped into place, a bond forged in desperation, burning through his ribs like a brand. His head whipped toward the terrace windows, and he ran. Elara's fingers had turned the color of marble, white with faint blue veins showing through skin that no longer felt like her own. She pressed her palms against the glass one more time, but there was no strength left in her arms. The impact made no sound, or perhaps the wind had simply swallowed it. Inside, a woman in emerald silk threw her head back, laughing at something a gentleman in a military dress uniform had said. The woman's throat was flushed pink with wine and warmth. Elara wondered if that was the last thing she would see, someone else's joy. She slid down until she was sitting with her back against the door, her legs splayed out in front of her like a discarded doll. The copper pitcher had tipped over somewhere to her left, its contents already frozen into a warped sheet of ice. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that stuck to her eyelashes and melted just slowly enough that she could feel each one as a tiny, cold kiss before it became part of the growing white shroud covering her lap. Her wolf. She needed her wolf. Every shifter knew that the animal form generated more heat, healed faster, survived longer. It was the fundamental advantage of their kind, the reason wolves had outlasted humans in the northern territories, the reason the packs had endured through centuries of winter. She closed her eyes and reached inward, searching for the presence that had lived inside her since her first shift at 13. The sensation was supposed to be immediate, like calling to a sister who shared your bones. But when she reached, there was nothing. Not absence, that would have been something, but a void so complete it felt like reaching into a grave. Panic spiked through her, hot and sharp enough to cut through the cold for one brutal moment. She tried again, pushing harder, calling deeper. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, each pulse a sluggish thud against her ribs, but her wolf remained silent, trapped, or worse, sedated. The tea, the memory surfaced through the fog that was beginning to cloud her thoughts. Luna Merelda had been waiting in the servants' hall when Elara had arrived for her shift, which was unusual enough to be notable. The Luna rarely ventured into the lower corridors unless she was conducting an inspection or delivering a reprimand. But she had been there, elegant in a gown of midnight blue, holding a delicate porcelain cup painted with winter roses. "Drink this," Merelda had said, her voice carrying that particular tone of command that nobles used when they wanted to pretend they were being generous. "You look pale. Chamomile and honey. It will steady your nerves for the gala. We can't have you trembling and spilling wine on the guests." Elara had taken the cup, because refusing a direct order from the Luna was unthinkable. The tea had been bitter beneath the honey, sharp in a way that chamomile never was, but she had drained it to the dregs while Merelda watched with those ice-chip eyes. The Luna had smiled when Elara handed back the empty cup. It hadn't been a kind smile. Wolfsbane. They called it moonsbane in the old texts, the purple flower that grew in shadow and could sever a shifter from their beast. In small doses, it was used medicinally, to slow a shift during a difficult healing, to calm a wolf driven mad by silver poisoning. In larger doses, it was a weapon, and in the dose Merelda had given her, it was a death sentence wrapped in porcelain and false concern. They had planned this. The realization settled over her like the snow, inevitable, suffocating, complete. Tarek's order to go outside hadn't been cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was execution, and Merelda had provided the poison that would ensure Elara couldn't save herself. She wondered how long they had been planning it. Days? Weeks? Had they been watching her, waiting for the right moment, the right excuse? Or had the Alpha's small kindness with the crystal glass been the final provocation that tipped them from contempt into murder? Her lips were numb now. She tried to move them, to form words, a prayer, a curse, her father's name, but her jaw wouldn't cooperate. The cold had moved past her skin, past her muscles, into the core of her. She could feel her thoughts beginning to fragment, consciousness becoming something slippery and uncertain. There were worse ways to die, she supposed. At least it was quiet. At least the snow was beautiful. Through the crystalline distortion of frost forming on the glass, she could see the ballroom spinning in slow circles. Or perhaps that was her vision failing. The chandeliers looked like stars now, distant and unreachable. She thought she saw someone moving faster than the others, cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk, but that might have been wishful thinking. The part of her that still functioned understood that no one was coming. No one had ever come. Her eyes drifted closed. The cold didn't hurt anymore. That was the mercy of freezing. Eventually, your body stopped fighting, stopped registering pain, and just let go. She could feel herself sinking into something vast and dark and surprisingly gentle. Her last conscious thought was strange and small. She hoped her father would forgive her for not being strong enough to survive. She hoped the Snowvale line hadn't ended with a whimper in the snow, forgotten and unnamed. Then, Alpha Kael Nightfang tore the terrace doors off their hinges.
"My mate," Kael repeated, and the words came out like a vow and a threat. "Someone tried to kill my mate." He looked down at the girl in his arms, at her blue lips and frozen lashes, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The old Kael, the one who had tolerated the nobles' games, who had kept the peace by allowing injustice to flourish in the shadows, was gone. What remained was something older and infinitely more dangerous. "Get the healer," he said softly, "and then lock every door in this manor. No one leaves until I have answers." The healer's chambers smelled of dried herbs and the sharp, medicinal bite of alcohol. Kael laid Elara on the examination table as gently as he could manage, though his hands were shaking with the effort of not destroying everything in reach. Dr. Soren Greymeyer had arrived within minutes of being summoned, his silver hair disheveled and his shirt buttoned wrong in his haste. He was old, nearly 70 winters, and had served the Nightfang pack since before Kael was born. If there was anyone in this corrupted manor Kael could trust, it was him. Soren didn't waste time with questions. He simply moved to Elara's side and began his assessment with the swift efficiency of a man who had spent decades repairing what violence and winter destroyed. He peeled away Kael's coat, then carefully cut away the thin servant's dress with surgical shears. Kael turned away instinctively, offering what privacy he could, but Soren's sharp intake of breath made him look back. The girl's torso was a map of old injuries, bruises in various stages of healing, yellow, green, the deep purple of fresh damage covered her ribs and arms. There were scars, too, thin white lines that spoke of cuts that had healed without proper care, and burns on her forearms in the distinctive pattern of hot cookware pressed against skin. Kael's wolf snarled inside him, clawing at his control. "How long?" His voice came out strangled. Soren's jaw was tight as he worked, wrapping Elara in heated blankets, checking her pupils, pressing his fingers to the pulse points at her throat and wrists. "The frostbite is severe but manageable. The hypothermia would have killed her in another 10 minutes. But these," he gestured to the scars, "years. This is years of systematic abuse." "Why didn't you report it?" The question came out sharper than Kael intended, but Soren didn't flinch. "Because I didn't see her, Alpha. Servants don't come to the pack doctor unless they're dying. They see the kitchen healer, Old Bess, who does what she can with folk remedies and prayer. Soren's hands were steady as he inserted a thin tube into Elara's arm, beginning an infusion of warmed saline. But now that I am seeing her, I need to draw blood. There's something wrong beyond the cold. Kael watched as Soren filled 3 vials with blood that looked too dark, too sluggish. The healer held one up to the lamplight, his expression grim. Wolfsbane, a significant dose administered within the last few hours. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Kael's rage had been a wildfire before, hot, consuming, destructive, but what filled him now was different. It was the cold of deep space, of absolute zero, the kind of cold that didn't burn, but simply erased. His voice, when he spoke, was perfectly calm. That's not accidental. No, Alpha, this was intentional poisoning. Wolfsbane in this concentration would have prevented her from shifting for at least 6 hours, combined with exposure to the cold. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Who has access to Wolfsbane in this manner? Myself, for medical purposes. It's kept in a locked cabinet in my dispensary. And Soren hesitated, his hands stilling over Elara's still form. And Kael's voice could cut glass. And Luna Merelda requested a supply 3 months ago. She said it was for her personal use. She suffers from occasional insomnia, and small doses can be sedative for some wolves. I saw no reason to refuse her. Kael felt something inside him settle into a decision that would reshape everything. Get me your records. Every injury you've treated, every request for Wolfsbane, every death in this packhouse for the last 5 years. Soren moved to a cabinet and retrieved a leather-bound ledger, his hands careful as he set it on the side table. Alpha, what you're suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm uncovering what's been rotting beneath this manor's floors while I was too blind to see it. Kael pulled the ledger toward him and began to flip through pages. The entries were meticulous. Soren had always been thorough. Broken bones from training accidents, burns from kitchen mishaps, a young servant girl who had died from an allergic reaction to shellfish, despite the fact that wolves didn't have food allergies, a young male servant who had fallen from a 3rd-story window. Every entry made the cold inside Kael sink deeper. How had he not seen this? How had he ruled this pack for 8 years and never noticed that servants were being brutalized and murdered in his own home? The girl, Soren said quietly, returning to Elara's side to adjust the warming blankets. She's not in my records at all. Not once in 3 years of employment. That means every injury she sustained was treated elsewhere, or more likely, not treated at all. Kael looked at his mate, because that's what she was, no matter how impossible or inconvenient or politically catastrophic that truth might be. Her color was slowly returning, the blue fading from her lips to leave them pale pink. Her breathing was stronger. She would live, but the scars would remain. And not just the ones on her skin. When she wakes, Kael said, still staring at her face, memorizing features he should have noticed months ago, I want you here. I want her to see a friendly face before she sees me. You saved her life, Alpha. I failed to prevent this from happening at all. That's not the same thing. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Soren, if anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to enter this room who isn't me or you, bar the door and call for the guard. She's under my protection now. Understood, Alpha. Kael stepped into the corridor, closing the door softly behind him. Ronan Blackclaw, his head enforcer, was waiting in the hall, his scarred face carefully neutral. Kael handed him the ledger. Read it. every word, and then find me everyone who had access to the terrace doors tonight. I want names, Ronan, and I want them before dawn." Ronan took the book, his expression darkening as he scanned the first few entries. "Sir, this is—"
"Treason," Kael finished. "This is treason, conspiracy, and murder, and it happened in my house, under my rule, with my implicit permission through my willful ignorance." He met his enforcer's eyes. "We're burning it down, Ronan. All of it. Every rotten board, every corrupted tradition, every noble who thought their blood made them untouchable. We're burning it all down and rebuilding from ash." "Where do we start?" "With the lock," Kael said. "Someone barred that door. Find out who." Ronan Blackclaw had been breaking bones and extracting truths for the Nightfang pack for 12 years, and he had learned that guilty men had a smell. It was subtle, a cocktail of elevated cortisol and adrenaline that soured the natural musk of wolf, but once you knew it, you could never mistake it for anything else. And right now, Tarek Ashmore's private study reeked of it. The room was everything Ronan expected from a nobleman who believed his bloodline made him royalty. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books that had never been opened, and a desk made from imported mahogany that probably cost more than a servant earned in 5 years. Ronan moved through it like a ghost, his fingers trailing over surfaces, opening drawers with the careful precision of a man who knew how to search without leaving evidence of the search. The first drawer yielded nothing. Correspondence with tailors, invitations to hunts, a flask of expensive whiskey. The second held financial records that showed Tarek spent far more than his allowance from the pack coffers, but that was hardly unusual for nobles who believed wealth was their birthright. The third drawer was locked. Ronan smiled without humor and retrieved the lock-picking kit from his coat pocket. The mechanism yielded in less than 30 seconds. Expensive locks were often easier to pick than cheap ones, designed more for aesthetics than security. Inside, he found a leather portfolio tied with black ribbon. He untied it carefully and spread the contents across the desk. Letters. At least 24 of them, written in Tarek's flowing script on expensive vellum. Ronan began to read, and with each sentence the cold that had settled into the manor since the Alpha found his dying mate seemed to deepen. The Snowvale girl grows bolder each day. Yesterday she looked directly at the Alpha when he addressed her. Such presumption in one so low-born is intolerable. "I have spoken with Aunt Merelda about the servant problem. She agrees that certain elements within the household have grown too comfortable. Measures must be taken to remind them of their place. The Winter Gala presents an opportunity. The storm is predicted to be severe, and accidents happen in such weather. One less mongrel in the kennels would hardly be noticed." Ronan's jaw tightened. These weren't just complaints, they were documented conspiracy. But it was the final letter, dated 3 days before the gala, that made his blood run cold. "Dearest Aunt, your suggestion regarding the herbal preparation is noted and appreciated. I have confirmed that the girl drinks chamomile tea each evening to settle her nerves, a weakness we can exploit. The combination of the tonic and the weather should prove sufficient. No one questions a servant's death in winter. The Alpha will mourn the loss of Crystal's serviceware more than he'll mourn her." Beneath the letter was a response, written in a different hand, elegant, feminine, with the distinctive flourish of someone educated in the old noble style. "Dearest Tarek, I have prepared the tonic as discussed, 3 drops of nightshade extract combined with wolfsbane in a ratio of 2:1, sweetened with honey to mask the bitterness. Administer it no more than 4 hours before exposure. The effects will last approximately 6 hours, during which she will be unable to shift or call for help. Dispose of the cup after. No trace, no questions. Your devoted aunt, M." Ronan stood in the silence of Tarek's study, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. He had seen violence in his years as enforcer, had committed plenty of it himself in service to the pack, but this was different. This was premeditated murder, written out like a recipe, discussed between aunt and nephew as casually as one might discuss the menu for a dinner party. And Merelda, Luna Merelda, who had stood beside the Alpha for the last 3 years, who had advised him on pack matters, who had represented the Nightfang family at diplomatic functions, who had been one step away from becoming his official mate and bearing the next generation of Nightfang heirs. She hadn't just known about the plot to kill Elara, she had orchestrated it. Ronan gathered the letters carefully and tucked them back into the portfolio. He needed to bring this to Kael immediately, but training made him thorough. He searched the rest of the study, finding more correspondence that painted a picture of systematic abuse, servants dismissed for theft they hadn't committed, complaints about uppity Omegas who needed correction, requisitions for silver chains and iron collars that had no legitimate use in a civilized packhouse. He was closing the last drawer when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Quick, light, feminine. The door opened before he could move, and Luna Merelda stood framed in the doorway, still wearing her midnight blue gown from the gala. Her eyes went immediately to the portfolio under Ronan's arm, and her expression, which was usually so carefully controlled, cracked just enough to show the calculation beneath. "Enforcer Blackclaw," she said, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "I wasn't aware Tarek had requested your services." He didn't, but the Alpha did. Something flickered in Merelda's eyes. Fear, yes, but also a cold, pragmatic assessment. She was evaluating her options, calculating odds, deciding whether to fight or flee or negotiate. Ronan had seen that look before, usually on criminals who were deciding whether to go quietly or make their captors work for it. "I see," she said finally. "And what did you find in your investigation?" "The truth." Ronan shifted his weight subtly, positioning himself between Merelda and the door's exit. "You tried to murder the Alpha's mate." "His mate," Merelda laughed without humor. "That gutter-born nothing. She's not his mate. She's a servant who caught his eye for a moment. By tomorrow he'll have forgotten her name. He carried her out of a blizzard in his arms and shattered every window in the ballroom with his grief. Does that sound like a man who'll forget?" Merelda's composure finally cracked. "She doesn't deserve him. She doesn't deserve any of this. Do you know what her father was? A drunk who gambled away her family's land and died in a gutter. Her bloodline is tainted, weak, worthless." "Her bloodline," Ronan said quietly, "is none of your concern. Your concern should be explaining to Alpha Kael why you conspired to poison and murder his fated mate." "Fated?" Merelda's voice rose, control slipping further. "There is no such thing as fate, Ronan. There is only breeding and tradition and the natural order that has kept our kind strong for centuries. That girl is a mistake." "That girl," a voice said from the doorway, "is the reason you're about to lose everything." They both turned to see Kael standing in the corridor, his face a mask of absolute zero cold. In his hands he held Soren's ledger, and his eyes, when they fixed on Merelda, held no recognition, no familiarity, nothing but the impersonal judgment of an Alpha who had just discovered a cancer in his pack. "Hello, Merelda," he said softly. "Let's talk about treason."